What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb and I'm here to tell you you're building Zimone wrong. I see a lot of internet discourse saying, okay, they gave us another boring Simic landfall commander that does boring landfall stuff. And to that I say, she's only a boring landfall commander if you build her that way. A lot of people are ignoring what she actually does and they're just getting hung up on the fact that she has landfall on her as a card. So let's get into some really cool interactions we can do with Zimone and what this deck's goal is overall. But before we do that, let's shout out those patrons. Irrelevant, you rock. Additionally, if you guys want a free $15, you can click on that whatnot link in the description down below. You'll get a free $15 and you'll be supporting the channel. Another great way to support the channel is just liking, commenting, and subscribing. I really appreciate it when you guys do that. Now let's get into what Zimone does. She's centered around the Manifest Dread mechanic, which I'm a fan of. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, we get to look at the top two cards of our library. One of those is going to get thrown into the graveyard, and then the other one's going to be manifested as a 2/2 creature that we can turn face up at any time by paying its mana cost. And then the rest of the card is pretty broken as well. Every land that enters the battlefield beyond the first one just says, hey, flip that permanent card face up, or any permanent card face up. So now we're cheating mana cost, which is very powerful, and we're not just cheating the mana cost of creatures. This will work for your artifacts, your enchantments, creatures, any permanent. We can just turn that face up and it's going to do exactly what the card says it's going to do. So that's pretty interesting on its own. And then again, there's a plethora of ways you can build her. You can build her top deck manipulation to where you always know what you're manifesting. You can build her classic landfall, which a lot of people are doing and then calling her boring, which is not fair. And then also you could just build her as a mill deck. Mill everything to an oblivion, get a ton of landfall triggers, turn your graveyard into your hand, and then, you know, get a ton of value. And we're going to build something that's in between all of those. We're going to get a lot of Manifest Dread triggers. We're going to turn a lot of permanents face up, not paying for their mana cost. And then additionally, we're going to turn our graveyard into our hand. Something that does make this strategy very viable is Seedborn Muse and then tap creatures that put lands directly into play. And then we're going to pair that with bounce lands. So this is basically going to make it to where we can consistently manifest dread at least once on every opponent's turn. That's going to make it to where we're seeing 6 cards of rotation. 8 cards of rotation, 6 cards on our opponent's turn. And that's just going to mill us through our graveyard incredibly quickly. Not to mention, we're going to get all of those manifested creatures that we can turn face up on either our turn whenever we're playing multiple lands, or additionally, if we have fetch lands, we can cheat fetch lands into play, sack them. There's a lot of ways to get 2 land triggers on our opponent's turn, just like using cards like Burgeoning, right? So again, the strategy for this deck is kind of open-ended, and we're just trying to get as much Manifest Dread triggers as possible for this one. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this deck tech, I also wanted to talk about her weird interaction with Yedora. Yedora says whenever a non-token creature dies, you can return it to the battlefield face down as a forest, right? Well, that's a landfall trigger. So Zimone will see that, and then we can turn that permanent face up. So as long as we have a sack outlet, or maybe that creature is able to sacrifice itself, we just get infinite die triggers, infinite landfall triggers, and we can go ahead and draw our entire deck in the right scenario. Maybe we have a Tatiova on the battlefield, right? Pretty busted here. Another thing that's really busted with this interaction is this guy, because he can actually sacrifice himself, and we can manifest our entire library. All that more coming in the deck tech. I'll explain how this deck wins, what we do when we manifest our entire library, how that results in us winning the game, and everything in between. So if that sounds like a deck tech you guys want to get into, let's get into it. Let's kick it off by talking about Zimone's cool interaction with threats around every corner. Whenever a face down permanent you control enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. This is really good because now all we have to do is play a land card, then we're going to manifest dread, which will have a face down permanent enter the battlefield, and then we're going to very easily get to flip that face up because again, Zimone's landfall trigger will trigger a second time. Pretty good there. Another thing that's going to be really good in this deck is including creatures with attack triggers that allow us to put additional lands into play. That way we can consistently trigger Zimone 2 times a turn while smashing our opponents in the face. Uro, Overlord of the Huntwoods, and Bonnie Paul are going to be perfect for that. These cards generate insane value, they're massive creatures, and they're going to allow us to put additional lands into play. AC Tyrant of Gyre along with Tatiova are going to be amazing in this deck. There is a scenario where these two can cause us to draw our entire deck if we have the right cards on the battlefield, but I'll go over that a little bit later in the video. Other good cards in the deck are They Come From Pipes. This one's just going to draw us a card whenever a face down creature enters, and it's also another way to manifest dread. A Baron Oculus is really good in this deck because usually whenever you have to cast it, you have to additionally exile 6 cards from your graveyard, which is not hard to get in this deck, but we can also just manifest dread it and then turn it face up, and we don't have to worry about casting it at all. And then we're going to manifest dread at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. So that's going to really start churning us through our library and getting those key pieces on the battlefield face down, allowing us to easily cheat them into play on our turn. Ashaya is also sneaky good with Zimone because remember, like morphs, these manifested cards are not tokens. So whenever one of them enters the battlefield face down, it's technically going to be a forest now because Ashaya makes all of our non-token creatures forests. So now we play a land, manifest dread, we get to put that 2/2 creature onto the battlefield, and then Zimone's going to trigger again, and again we get to flip it immediately face up. Nezahal also is going to be amazing here. It's Rhystic Study on a giant body that we're cheating into play. Arcanus is absolutely insane as well, since we are going to weave in a Seedborn Muse strategy. Seedborn Muse and this guy on the battlefield, you're going to draw upwards to 12 cards of rotation. That's just not going to be okay. Virtue of Strength, Mana Reflections, Nyx Bloom Ancient, we're doubling, we're tripling mana. This is going to be very easy to do. We just manifest dread these high costed cards and then flip them right up, and boom, we've catapulted ourselves ahead of our opponents by a large margin. Zendikar Resurgent, also a solid way to double up our mana while getting some card advantage. Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, we're not trying to make friends here, and I have an extra one on my shelf, so hey, we'll slap it in the deck as well. Another way to make our opponents salty while again catapulting us ahead of them. One with the multiverse is very useful in these decks that just play high CMC things. Now we're able to cheat them into play using something other than our commander. It's very important that our strategy just doesn't brick if Zimone gets removed. Kamal, Heart of Krosa, synergizes with throwing a lot of lands into the battlefield, doubling up on all of the mana our lands are producing, and it's just going to make our creatures hit like a truck. Rampaging Ballast make an insane board state very quickly. Hullbreaker Horror just controls the entire game. This deck can very easily play at instant speed, so whenever we're able to cast anything from our hand at any time, we're basically going to use our creature spells as counter spells. All we have to do is give them flash, cast them in response to one of our opponent's spells, and that's just going to get bounced to their hand while we get giant creatures. Not okay. Another thing that's not okay is Coma Cosmos Serpent. This thing's barely fair at 7 mana, so imagine when we're just cheating it into play for free very early in the game. That's going to be very fun to do and very hard for our opponents to dig themselves out of. Ancient Green Warden is going to double up on all of our landfall triggers. Yedora, we've already talked about this guy, but we'll go over him again. He's absolutely broken in this deck with a sack outlet like Greater Good. You're just going to go infinite, and you can draw your entire deck this way and throw your entire deck in the graveyard. Whisperwood Elemental, when we pair it with Yedora, does something very cool because we can sacrifice Whisperwood and then it's going to instantly come back because it enters in as a land. Zimone flips it back over due to her second trigger, and then we're able to sacrifice it again. Not to mention, he gives all of our creatures the ability to manifest the top card of the library whenever they die. So now whenever he's dying over and over again, we're able to manifest our entire deck. This is where Suruk and Goreclaw come into play. We're just going to flip these guys face up, give all of our creatures haste, and attack everybody with our entire library. Pretty fun way to end the game if you ask me. Another cool guy in this deck is Secure Tribuilder. I'm just mentioning this guy because he also does the Yedora thing. We can get every basic land card out of our library whenever we have Secure Tribuilder and Yedora on the battlefield with Zimone. Kind of cool. Moving on to the Seedborn strategy of the deck, we're playing a lot of Llanowar Scout effects. Scald Herbalist, Secure Tribe Scout, Sky Shroud Ranger, Walking Atlas. We just want to be able to put lands into play on our opponent's turn. Whenever you pair these guys with bounce lands, it's incredibly powerful because we're going to put them into play and then immediately bounce them back into our hand. That way we never run out of lands to play. Pair this with Seedborn Muse and we're going to be manifesting dread at least 4 times a rotation on a minimum. The overall goal though is to get 2 of these on the battlefield or something like a Burgeoning. That way we're able to hit actually 2 land drops on our opponent's turn. Now we're really able to start playing mind games because we just have a 2/2 creature on the battlefield, but out of nowhere that 2/2 creature could turn into anything from a Coma Cosmos Serpent to a Nezahal Primal Tide. Our opponents aren't going to know, so they're really not going to want to attack into us to find out. Another card that pairs really well with Seedborn Muse is Alchemist's Refuge and Emergent Zone. Now we can sacrifice these, play at instant speed, and we can cast spells on our opponent's turn, allowing us to have upwards to 4 turns of rotation. It's kind of a fair way to take extra turns in casual Magic. Azuzel's Lost But Seeking and Awaken the Woods is a good way to flip all of our cards that have been manifested. Sometimes we're able to manifest more than we're able to get that second land drop per turn, right? So whenever we have a bunch of manifested cards, it's really solid just to cast Awaken the Woods and flip all of those manifested cards face up out of nowhere, surprising our opponents with a lot of scary bombs. Retreat to Coralhelm is that nasty card I was talking about that combos with Tatyova and AC. What's going to happen here is we need any of our Llanowar Scout effects, and then we need a bounce land. So we play the bounce land, we untap our Llanowar Scout, and then we bounce our bounce land back to our hand. Then we can go ahead and tap Llanowar Scout to put our bounce land back into play. Retreat to Coralhelm, untaps Llanowar Scout, and returns the bounce land back to our hand. This effectively gives us infinite landfall triggers. It allows us to flip all of our manifested cards, and then additionally, if Tatyova, AC, or any other landfall effect are on the battlefield, we get infinite amount of that effect as well. 6 and Life from the Loam are my new favorite ways to just turn your graveyard into your hand instantly. Not to mention Life from the Loam is pretty useful here just to grab our fetch lands from the graveyard and replay them. It can also grab our other utility lands like Emergent Zone, Otawara, Beseiju, very powerful cards here. Springleaf Nantuko, also very cool. I like bestowing this on something like Avenger of Zendikar and just going off out of nowhere. There's a lot of very good targets for Springleaf in this deck, so I'm excited to give it a try and just create some broken board states. Echo of Eons felt like a necessity. Not only can we very easily get it in our graveyard for that flashback cost, but we might end up milling ourselves out. So it's definitely a good idea just to have this sitting in our graveyard just in case we need that shuffler. Again, greater good, very solid here. Just a way to draw a ton of cards whenever we're messing around with these massive creatures. I'm also running Invasion of Chandelar. Not only is it a little bit of graveyard recursion, but again, it's another way we can start cheating permanents into play. Like I said, it's very important that you make the deck functional without the commander. Ixodron, probably not an okay card here. This is going to flip all of our opponent's cards and our cards face down, right? And they have no meaningful way to turn them face up. This is going to allow us to completely take over the game. Just make sure you have a way to save Zimone, because Zimone needs to be saved. That way we are actually able to turn our things face up. Last but not least, I thought Genesis Wave would be a really fun card in this deck. We have a lot of ways to triple up on our mana, quadruple up on our mana, so it's just going to be really fun to cast a massive Genesis Wave, get a ton of landfall triggers, and throw a ton of permanents into play. With that being said, guys, that's going to be the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're enjoying these deck techs. Now let's shout out those patrons. Irrelevant, Chicken Salad, The Professional Gamer, Excessum, and Creator. You guys rock. As always, I hope this helped you guys in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.